Anti-Corruption Agency Act 2017, designed to boost Jamaica's anti-corruption framework. Prime Minister Andrew Holness, who tabled the MOCA bill during his 2017-2018 budget debate presentation, said the legislation is designed to transform the body into an elite law enforcement investigative agency, operating independently of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the JCF. This move, he said, forms part of the administration's plan to secure Jamaica's initiative aimed at fostering peace and prosperity by tackling challenges associated with crime and violence and poverty. The Prime Minister underscored that corruption is one area of significant focus, particularly in light of Jamaica's challenges with crime and violence. Opening presentation for the State of the Constituency debate is also scheduled to be given by Member of Parliament Philip Paulwell. And if you are planning to attend a session at Gordon House, here are some rules you need to keep in mind. No visitor shall create any act of disorder within the precincts of the House. No visitor shall be admitted to the House without first obtaining an admission card from the office of the clerk. Visitors who remain within the precincts of the House during the suspension of the session are asked to keep silent. No photography, videography, or sketching of the proceedings is allowed unless authorized by the presiding officer. And there should be no smoking inside the parliamentary building. Now over to the proceedings.
And to wish him continued health. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to give thanks to Almighty God for restoring me to a level of health that I can return to the House to continue my duties. And I wish to acknowledge the sentiments that have been passed on by my colleagues in this House. I received some while at home. I received some visits while I was in the hospital at the university, and I received some in Montego Bay at the Cornwall Regional as well. Yes, you came to, I remember you, Daryl, you came. I want to thank everyone for their wishes and their sentiments, Mr. Speaker, because it went a far way to reinforce the fact that we are really colleagues in here and we really care about each other, notwithstanding the cut and thrust sometimes that is exhibited. I want to acknowledge the work of the medical staff at Cornwall Regional and at the University of the West Indies, because I went to both places. They did a tremendous job, and I want to thank them for their service and wish for them all the best, and particularly those at Cornwall Regional who work under very trying conditions, as we all know. I just want to say a special word of thanks to them, the entire medical staff, and to urge the minister and the government to continue his work in the rehabilitation process so that the conditions physically can improve for those people who have to utilize that facility. But a tremendous job is being done down there, and we want to thank them both at the university and at Cornwall Regional. And Mr. Speaker, I wish to say a special word of thanks to the Most Honourable Prime Minister, because I did receive your sentiments from Dr. Chan. He, as a Member of Parliament from St. James, he was the first person to come and visit me at Cornwall Regional, and he brought your sentiments. And for the other things that you have committed to do, I want to thank you on behalf of myself and my family. Thank you very much. And just to say finally, Mr. Speaker, Craig, with your indulgence, that I think that we in this Parliament have done ourselves a great disservice over time. We have found the time to work hard on behalf of the people who we serve, who have elected us to come here, but we have not found the time to take care of ourselves. And I really think that this may be a point in time where we have to look very seriously about how we treat ourselves as parliamentarians. And sometimes we overextend our stay in the House because of the conditions. The Deputy House Leader, the member from St. Catherine, brought a resolution here some time ago, which was accepted by the House. But as nothing has happened since that resolution came here, I would want to urge him to put it back on the table so that some serious discussion can be concluded on it. And I use the word concluded because it has been outstanding for far too long. And we allow it to be drifting aimlessly like leaves in a storm. We need to settle that issue once and for all. Once again, Mr. Speaker, thank you for your indulgence and thank the members.
Call up the roll. Sir, you did that? Yeah, Sermon. Announcements?
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Ministry Paper Number 60, Cabinet Agenda Issues dated August 14, 2017. Ministry Paper Number 61, Cabinet Agenda Issues dated August 29, 2017. Ministry Paper Number 62, an annual report of the Office of Utilities Regulation for the financial year 2016-2017. Ministry Paper Number 63, Cabinet Agenda Issues dated September 4, 2017. Ministry Paper Number 64, Cabinet Agenda Issues dated September 11, 2017. The National Housing Trust, Housing Benefits, Special Selection, Estuary Housing Development Order 2017.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that this Honourable House of Representatives call upon the government to take into account proposals put forward by members of Parliament regarding constituency matters in reviewing the budget for the current financial year and forecasting the estimates of revenue and expenditure for the 2018-2019 financial year. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to commence debate on this motion.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move the following motion. Be it resolved that the National Housing Trust, Housing Benefits, Special Selection, Estuary Housing Development Order 2017, under the National Housing Trust Act, which was laid on the table of the House on the 10th day of October 2017, be referred to the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives for consideration and report.
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I'll move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Governor General Expenditure, Personal Staff, Tax Exemptions and Pensions Amendment Act 2017.
I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take first reading of the bill, give notice of its second reading, and commence debate on the bill.
Chuck.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read the first time the following bills shortly entitled 1. The Justices of the Peace Act 2017, and 2. The Renaming of the Courts of Petty Sessions Miscellaneous Amendments Act 2017.
Mr. Speaker, beg to move the following resolution. Be it resolved that there be an immediate increase awarded to National Insurance Scheme pensioners and beneficiaries, and that henceforth NIS benefits be indexed to the Consumer Price Index.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Whereas the Government of Jamaica, through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, has committed the sum of $8.279 billion in this year's budget for the Program of Advancement through Health and Education to provide financial assistance for children, elderly persons with no pension, and poor adults, pregnant and lactating women, and persons with disabilities, and whereas there are 103,484 adults and 249,634 children registered in PATH, a total of 353,118 beneficiaries as at August 2017, and whereas, Mr. Speaker, there's a direct correlation between the high levels of poverty driven largely by poor economic and social conditions, and persons having children for whom they are unable to provide the basics of food, shelter, and education, leading oftentimes to anger and frustration and the subsequent result of parental, spousal, and sibling abuse. And whereas, Mr. Speaker, the Government of Jamaica, through the said Ministry of Labour and Social Security, can institute and adopt policies to provide the requisite resources to monitor the PATH program and mandate relevant conditions for its beneficiaries which are necessary for the continued enrollment in the PATH program. And whereas, Mr. Speaker, it is acknowledged that through training and counseling, among other interactions, the mindsets and outlooks of individuals can be changed, their circumstances notwithstanding, be it resolved that the administrators of the PATH program take steps to provide programs for PATH beneficiaries to receive counseling in safe and effective methods of birth control where age appropriate, and for all parents and guardians of children registered in the program to participate in obligatory training seminars in parenting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and answers to questions. Mr. Tweed.
Mr. Speaker, next 14 days I beg to ask the Minister of Education the following questions listed in my name.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Sorry.
Mr. Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the General Consumption Tax Removal of Exemptions Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2017.
A bill shortly entitled the General Consumption Tax Removal of Exemptions Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2017 read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Mr. Speaker, permission to speak from a seat on my own. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first-time a bill shortly entitled the Data Protection Act 2017.
Act 2017, read a first time. Thanks.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Public business. Minister Warmington.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Industry, you doing yours first?
No, it's
Can we?
No.
What is it again? The Minister of Industry, Commerce and Agriculture.
Mr. Simula.
Mr. Speaker, this is in respect of an act to amend the Processed Food Act and the Processed Food General Regulations. And the matter was brought to the House for the first time. I'm now going to debate the matter, Mr. Speaker. In keeping with the general policy, government's policy to enhance efficiency in the trade and commerce, a decision has been taken to amend the Processed Foods Act, PPFA. A copy of what? Of the statement? No, it's not a statement. I'm concluding a bill. I'm reading a bill. Let me start again. In keeping with the government's policy to enhance efficiency in the trade and commerce, a decision has been taken to amend the Processed Food Act, PFA, and the Processed Food General Regulations 1959 to remove the requirement for export certificates to facilitate the implementation of the automated system for customs data, ASECURA, a sub-based system designed to transform the Jamaican Customs Agency into a paperless operation through the use of electronic documents. One of the main objectives of the ASECURA system is to harmonize trade procedures and reduce trade barriers. Consequently, this objective envisages the incorporation of the Bureau of Standards of Jamaica, BSJ's port-related procedures into the system. The Jamaica Customs Agency, JCA, indicated that it could not incorporate the export certificate component of the Processed Foods Act into ASECURA, into the system. And both the JCA and the Bureau of Standards of Jamaica, BSJ, having consulted, have jointly recommended the removal of the provisions in the Act relating to requirements for export certificates. The removal of the export certificates provision will shorten the process for the export of processed food, constitute a positive step towards a more trade facilitatory regime, and bring Jamaica further in line with international best practices which posit a risk-based approach towards production. This bill therefore seeks to amend the Processed Food Act and the Processed Food General Regulations to give effect to that decision. I was pausing for contributions from that side, but since there is none, well, you must get up and talk. If you don't get up to respond, what do you want me to do?
Mr. Speaker, I am trying on a point of order to ascertain where on the order paper is this bill? Number 20. Okay, so it was actually tabled last week. Okay. Oh, pardon? The week before.
You'll notice, it was read the first time. No.
Mr. Bunting, try and see if you can get to a mic that the Hansard people can hear you. Or
any better?
Yes,
a little
I'm
better?
hearing you.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, I was saying this is not a controversial bill. It's not one that the opposition has any objection to. And in fact, the idea of bringing our export procedures up to international best practice is desirable. And in fact, it is really tidying up something that ideally should have been introduced simultaneously with the Asikuda system. And therefore, we really don't have any objection, and we support this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Treat.
Mr. Speaker, the measure which indeed has our support has to do with the circumstances facilitating exports, particularly of food products, I believe. And I would ask the Minister if he would advert to the recent quite stringent regulations which have been enforced during the month of September, I believe, by the United States government, the relevant authority, in respect of the export of Jamaican produce to the United States, the standards, phytosanitary and others that have been straightened and tightened. And it is widely reported that a very small proportion of Jamaican exporters are in a position to comply with these new regulations, which will have an effect on the value and quantum of our exports. And I would invite the Minister if he would report as to what efforts his ministry and the government is making to assist with the compliance with those standards, and to state any effect that these new regulations from the country to which we export most will affect our export targets.
I thank the member for bringing this matter to the House, because it is something that has been discussed by us within the ministry, and we recognize the introduction of more stringent regulations regarding our exports to the United States. But, Mr. Speaker, I take the opportunity to indicate that no one is exempt from the practice of introducing non-tariff barriers. And we have been subject to that for many years, which is an impediment to our growth and development of the export sector, especially in the area of food that is exported. The attempts by the government, successive governments, to introduce measures to ensure that we strengthen our phytosanitary provisions to enable us to meet international standards. We have an agricultural competitive program which seeks to achieve a level of what we call global gap provisions, which opens the gateway for us by meeting international standards to have our products introduced into the United States and indeed the world, Europe especially in the areas of Irish potato, of sweet potato and peppers and all the various produce that we are so efficient at producing. The point is well taken, and it's something that we are paying particular attention to, because whatever happens, we cannot grow our agricultural sector without taking into consideration the need for us to process agricultural produce so that we add value to the raw materials and thereby earn maximum foreign exchange. And the only way we'll be able to do that is to meet the international standards, and we are seeking through our agencies and the various
safeguard measures that we are taking, and the practices in the fields themselves, how the produce is grown, how it is cared for, how it is prepared, how it's packaged. We just completed a packing house at New Forest Duff House, which will serve to be able to facilitate the farmers being able to have their produce packaged properly and marketed properly with all the phytosanitary provisions that will enable us to play our part in competing effectively throughout the world. So, Mr. Speaker, thanks very much, the member, for those observations. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, there's no one else standing. I now, Mr. Speaker, ask that the bill be read a second time.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
I'm trying to read the bill a second time.
No, Mr. Samud, I'm not ready for you yet.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Processed Food Act and the Processed Food General Regulations 1959, read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. I put clause 1. Those in favor? Members, I put clause 1. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 3. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 4. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. What is this here?
Clause 5, then clause 6, then 1-1.
Put them 1-1. I put clause 5. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 6. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 7. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 8. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put clause 9. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the schedule. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendment. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage without amendments. Those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I now ask that the bill be read a third time.
Third time. Those in favour? Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. Members. Clerk will now read the bill the third time.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Processed Food Act and the Processed Food General Regulations 1959, read a third time and passed.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance will now take the Senate amendments to the Pension Service Act 2017.
Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Senate has returned the Pensions Act, which has now been approved in the Senate with some 50 amendments. I just wish to point out, Mr. Speaker, that on under clause 7, subsection 2, section 2, subsection 4, where it reads, the fund shall be established on such date as the minister may determine by order, subject to affirmative resolution, and on the minister being satisfied. It says, and to the minister being satisfied. So we have to move the word to and place the word on. Beyond that, there are no further observations, Mr. Speaker, except to say that the Senate has carried out its effective function as a review chamber and has helped to significantly tidy up this bit of legislation. So I beg for the adoption of this and approval of this bill.
Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, we now take the Building Act and the continued debate on the bill shortly entitled the Building Act 2017, and the Attorney General will now make her contribution.
Mr. Sword. You may go ahead.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support the bill entitled An Act to Repeal the Kingston and St. Andrew Building Act and the Parish Council's Building Act, and to make new provisions for the regulations of the building industry to facilitate the adoption and efficient application of national building standards to be called the National Building Code of Jamaica, for ensuring safety in the built environment, enhancing amenities, and promoting sustainable development, and for connected matters. Mr. Speaker, this bill is coming at a time when the call for a modern framework to guide the regulation of building activities in the island is loud. The existing regulations are admittedly outdated, and they have not allowed for effective regulation of the building industry, nor do they provide for a modern building sector. Mr. Speaker, there are many provisions in the various parts of the bill which I will not go through. But among the areas of particular interest to me as a representative of the people of St. James West Central is Part 11 of the bill, which speaks to the regulation of building practitioners. Mr. Speaker, the bill provides for the establishment of a building practitioners board that will, among other things, define and establish categories of practice of building practitioners and determine the scope and nature of building work that each category of practice of building practitioners shall be licensed to perform. The Building Practitioners Board will also determine qualifications and licensing criteria, and from time to time will review and monitor the conduct of building practitioners. Mr. Speaker, we have set ourselves national development goals, and it is said that in no other area than in the quality of housing and other buildings will you see the extent to which a nation is developed. My call really, Mr. Speaker, is for the Ministry of Local Government and all of government to be mindful that it doesn't matter how many laws we pass. If the persons who are charged with enforcement of these laws fall short, we will not get the desired results. And so, Mr. Speaker, a number of persons hold themselves out as building practitioners, masons, carpenters, electricians across a wide area. And very often you hear the complaints, as I do in my constituency, of the poor standard of the work. Very often you hear that the authorities are not regulating and are not enforcing, and those who employ building practitioners are shortchanged at the end of the day. With the passing of this new law, we have a fresh opportunity to ensure that our buildings are up to standard, and that persons who work in the construction industry will be provided an opportunity to be certified to a level where they can build safely and at the required standard. Mr. Speaker, there is also another area that I think is worthy of mention. In fact, two other areas. The bill provides for the making of regulations to deal with water harvesting, including the storage of rainwater, for energy efficiency, and for the use of renewable technology and energy conservation. Mr. Speaker, you are no doubt aware that right across Jamaica, so many persons complain about the inadequacy of water. And I look forward to the regulations being passed, and I speak through you directly to the Honourable Minister of Local Government and Community Development to ensure that when the plans come in for approval, that the provision for water is taken into account, and the provision for energy efficiency and conservation. we have to ensure that our people are put at a stage where they can live a little easier, especially when it comes to water. Mr. Speaker, the last area that I wish to highlight is contained in Part 8, starting at Clause 59, and it is a provision for regulations dealing with party structure. And the bill defines party structure to include party walls, dividing walls, partitions, and fences between premises, either owned or occupied by different persons. This is an area, through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Honourable Minister, that the regulations must come very quickly. You are very aware of the number of concerns that come from residents in this area and the gap in the law to deal with party structures. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill for wholesale support. The time has indeed come for a modern framework to replace the outdated existing legislative framework that has impeded the effective regulation and development of a modern building sector. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Honourable Minister will indulge us. The member from Clarendon Southwest is due to make a presentation on the bill. He did call earlier to say that he had an unfortunate accident yesterday evening, but we were still expecting him to arrive. It is entirely within the government's power to proceed and to conclude, but I'm asking for discussion here while I seek to ascertain the whereabouts of the member.
Mr. Speaker, Mr.
McKenzie.
This bill has been tabled now for more than 4 months, Mr. Speaker. And, you know, I find it difficult to accept. Very difficult to accept, Mr. Speaker. I don't think I'm prepared to extend that courtesy, Mr. Speaker. Because, you know,
it's okay.
I indicated
it's okay.
3 weeks ago.
It's okay.
3 weeks ago that I intend to close the bill.
It's okay.
And it is critical to do so.
Minister, Mr. Paulwell, if you are standing, you have to stand. No, you have to get permission to speak.
And I now seek your permission, Mr. Speaker.
On what ground are you seeking?
We will allow the minister to conclude, save and accept that.
Members.
Save and accept that
I'm
the member.
trying to make a ruling here.
Yes. The member from Western.
The minister was speaking. Yeah. Are you standing on a point of order? Are you asking him to yield while you speak, or what? How do I proceed?
I was trying to assist the minister. The member from Western St. Andrew will make a contribution at this time.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. McKenzie, are you making a contribution towards the bill?
Well, I'm supposed to be closing the bill, but Mr. Speaker, I will.
No, the member is asking permission for one of his.
I will.
Thank you very much.
Allow the member.
Will you yield so that the person who wants to speak will do so before you close the bill?
The member from Southwest. I will.
Thank you very much.
Withhold and allow him next week.
Mr. Paulwell, when is the person going to speak?
Mr. Speaker, after suspension and the debate on the Building Act 2017.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister Wilmington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for recommittal of the presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Minister Grange.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take first reading of the bill, notice of which I gave earlier, and also for me to give notice of its second reading and commence debate on the bill.
Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker, I now move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled The National Heroes and Other Freedom Fighters Absolution from Criminal Liability in Respect of Specified Events Bill.
A bill shortly entitled The National Heroes and Other Freedom Fighters Absolution from Criminal Liability in Respect of Specified Events Bill, read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of second reading of the bill.
Minister Grange.
Okay. Mrs. You're distracting me. Mr. Speaker, members of this Honourable House, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, today must go down in the annals of this Honourable House as a day of historic proportions, the value and substance of which must never be diminished.
Hear, 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 hear.
Today, we, the children, the grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of our forebears unite around an honorable act, the tabling of a bill whose objective is to redeem and restore the dignity and integrity of those who suffered much, even to the point of giving their lives so that we would be free. Free to be who we want to be. Free to aspire to the best we can be. Free to make them proud by the various actions we put in place to assure them that we, their children, will one day rid our land of persistent poverty and self-destruction. That we will carve out for our beloved country, Jamaica, a destiny molded in sustainable prosperity. Mr. Speaker, words from Jamaican poet Vera Bell come to mind as we contemplate this important activity on behalf of our ancestors. Ancestor on the auction block, across the years your eyes seek mine, compelling me to look. I see you sweating, toiling, suffering. Within your loins, I see the seed of multitudes from your labor grow roads, aqueducts, civilizations. Yours was the task to clear the ground, ours be the task to build.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, today we are compelled to look back through the course of our history, a glorious history of resistance and resilience, of indomitable spirit and heroic stance. And we do so, Mr. Speaker, in order to put this activity into its correct perspective. Mr. Speaker, the past we reflect on today was the worst of times.
Amen.
It was a time of hardship and oppression for people of African descent who were taken forcibly from their families and homes in Africa and brought to serve in chattel slavery on plantations across Jamaica, across the Caribbean and the Americas. In this most demeaning process, the colonizers sought to take from these Africans all the vestiges of their humanity. They took their names, they took their identity, and they took their dignity. Their lot was to enrich the enslavers and planters, to bring fortunes to the crown even as they lost contact with everything they knew and loved in their native Africa. Guyanese Caribbean historian and political activist Walter Rodney, in reflecting on this period of world history, described it as how Europe underdeveloped Africa. Mr. Speaker, our ancestors arrived in Jamaica over 3 centuries of the transatlantic trade in Africans. But we must pause to remember also the many who did not arrive, like those who chose the waters of the Atlantic over chattel slavery. And there were those, as in the Zong incident off the coast of Jamaica, in the vicinity of Black River, who were tossed overboard, Mr. Speaker, into the Caribbean Sea to lighten the ship and claim insurance money. Mr. Speaker, those who arrived landed at various ports, Kingston Harbor, Falmouth, Lucy, etc., and were placed on auction blocks, later to be branded, Mr. Speaker, like animals, given new names, and led to the various plantations across the country. There they toiled and labored in every kind of weather to fill the coffers of Europe, even as Africa and the so-called New World became impoverished. Mr. Speaker, our ancestors, and Mr. Speaker, I must pause, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and colleagues, I must pause to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Julius Garvey, who is in the gallery here with us today. And with him are members of the National Council on Reparations. Mr. Speaker, our ancestors were of an ancestral pedigree that was not daunted by challenges, no matter how great they may be or how seemingly unsurmountable. They came to Jamaica shackled and belabored, but within their fertile minds dwelt the militant cultures that they had fashioned back home in the various tribal forces of the continent. Mr. Speaker, they soon became freedom fighters, buffalo soldiers stolen from Africa, fighting on arrival, fighting for survival. In this prolific and prolonged campaign, they wreaked mayhem and holy war against the oppressors. They made life difficult for those who would try to rule them, making them realize that though they would enslave the body, they could not enslave the mind. Their fertile mind was in a state of constant preparation for the time when they or their children would be free. And so, Mr. Speaker, Taki struck for freedom for the enslaved Africans. A relative of my colleague sitting to my left. He led one of the most serious and solid campaigns against the oppressors in the parish of St. Mary between May and July 1760. The fierceness and determination of its campaign, as well as the level of militancy and skill demonstrated by the leader, caused the Taki War, or the St. Mary Rebellion, to be considered as the most significant slave rebellion in the Caribbean between 1733 slave insurrection in St. John and the 1791 Haitian Revolution. And then there was Right Excellent Sam Sharp, national hero. His campaign was one of the most remarkable in organization, meticulous planning, and effective implementation. Determined to end the tyranny of slavery, this Baptist deacon held meetings at nights in various sections of St. James, from Catadupa to Kensington, as part of his campaign. Mr. Speaker, he was a determination to rather die on yonder gallows than to live one more day of slavery. And as the record shows, he did die at the hands of the executioner on May 23, 1832, after succeeding in staging the first organized labor resistance in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, the most significant achievement of the Christmas Rebellion was that it caused the British Crown to abolish slavery. But emancipation, wrought in 1834, did not end the slavery of the rule of tyranny of the European mercenaries. It also did not reduce the militancy of the African people. And so, as the oppression reached high levels, by 1865, it was the turn of the Right Excellent George William Gordon, a legislator, and the Right Excellent Paul Bogle, a Baptist deacon, to lead a multitude of followers in another determined effort to put an end to the tyranny. And then finally, Mr. Speaker, there was in modern Jamaica a recognition that slavery had infiltrated the minds of the enslaved, who had by then showed signs of what could be seen as inferiority complex. Armed with insight from the books he read, the Right Excellent Marcus Messiah Garvey became the voice of black consciousness as he promoted a philosophy of black business and political acumen. Garvey's philosophy was supported by an activism that saw him engaging in business and politics, which soon brought him into conflict with the modern version of the imperial power. Garvey's militancy was in the force of his words, his unwavering stance in the face of opposition, and his belief in the power of the black man to become master of his own destiny. Mr. Speaker, this invariably placed him in a posture of collision with the colonial rulers, which led to his imprisonment. It must also be noted, Mr. Speaker, that in saluting the leaders cited in this presentation, our bill recognizes those who supported these movements. These were the rank and file African people who believed in the leadership, saw the need to battle against the forces of oppression, and cognizant of the type of punishment that would result, were willing and determined to become participants in the cause, even unto death. We salute these rank and file persons in this bill today, whom we treat in the same manner as the leaders they supported, in another most blatant demonstration of complicity. Mr. Speaker, in other words, we, the generation that has taken up this task of absolving our forebears, are, by this action, complicit with them in their various campaigns and endeavors, and treat with the supporters, the sympathizers, and participants by association in like manner as we do their leaders. Mr. Speaker, let the record show. Mr. Speaker, in those worst of times of colonial oppression and slavery, those who would dare to stand up against man's inhumanity to man, to strike out against all forms of tyranny, to promote a militant campaign to restore the dignity of an entire people, were seen by the organs of said tyranny as conspirators, as enemies, and even criminals. These oppressors, with authority given to them by certain laws, created labels of terror and oppression as they determined that the freedom fighters be deemed as enemies to the very freedom for which they fought. And so, Mr. Speaker, today, we, the children of these freedom fighters who gave up life and liberty so we can be free, cannot sit in silence and agree to a system that rendered those who freed us with their lives as criminals. It would be unjust for the children of the oppressed, emboldened by a vision of future liberty for their children, to sit silently and allow the names of these martyrs for freedom to have their names and images tarnished by a brutal, uncaring system of governance. It is the duty of those of us who are the inheritors of the new life that resulted from their self-sacrifice to take the bold step and correct the wrongs of the past, restore the dignity and integrity of the cause for which they so willingly died. The following extract from the book Daddy Sharp by Fred Kennedy, and cited as words written by Methodist minister Reverend Henry Blebby, captures it well, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, "I witnessed the execution. I was anxious to see how he would demean himself when actually confronted with the stern and solemn realities of death and eternity. I could not help feeling deep sorrow and indignation as I turned from his death scene and brushed away the tears which the contemplation of his tragic fate called forth. That such a man as Samuel Sharp, who possessed a mind which under proper influence and direction was capable of noble things, should be thus immolated at the polluting shrine of slavery. Sam Sharp was the most intelligent and remarkable slave I've ever known." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, it is this that we are doing by tabling this bill, providing a solution for an entire nation to appreciate of mind that our ancestors had and the remarkable ability and tenacity they displayed. This bill gives new life to these our heroes and unsung heroes. This bill, Mr. Speaker and colleagues, this bill seeks to redress the wrongs and set the captives free. Mr. Speaker, permit me at this point to express appreciation to a number of persons and entities who have played supportive roles in the processes we have followed. They are Minister Mike Henry, who has been one of those at the forefront in advocating for reparations. Senator Tom Tavares Finson, who framed the bill. Minister Bobby Montague, who ensured that the cabinet submission, which we co-signed, was taken to cabinet expeditiously. Professor Vereen Shepherd for her research and advocacy. Dr. Julius Garvey, whose name speaks volume in honor of his father. The Council on Reparations, all the members, the Legislative Committee, the Attorney General, who was a tower of strength and support to ensure that this bill was laid in Parliament today. The Attorney General's office, and of course, the Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, if I may be allowed in closing, one final personal testimony. Allow me to say how privileged I feel as one who was born and grew up in the bowels of West Kingston to have been chosen by the ancestors to table this very, very significant bill of redress. As I speak, Mr. Speaker, I hear the voices and feel the spirits of such greats as Mortimer Plano, Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and of course, one who is very much alive with us today, Edward Seaga. And all those who brought light to the eyes of so many, so that West Kingston became the oasis of Jamaica's greatest gift to the world, reggae music, the message music, with anthems to the oppressed like One Love, Many Rivers to Cross, Equal Rights and Justice, Revolution, One Man Against the World, War, Stepping Out of Babylon, and so many others. Today, Mr. Speaker, this humble daughter of West Kingston invites us all in this honorable house to unite in celebrating this bill. The bill to absolve certain national heroes, namely the Right Excellent Samuel Sharp, the Right Excellent George William Gordon, the Right Excellent Paul Bogle, the Right Excellent Marcus Messiah Garvey, their supporters, sympathizers, and participants by association, and other freedom fighters from criminal liability arising from participation in the 1760 Takis or St. Mary Rebellion, the 1831 to 1832 Christmas Rebellion, the 1865 Morant Bay Rebellion, and the 1929 campaign of the People's Political Party, respectively, and to provide for connected matters. Yes, this resistance and militancy led to many skirmishes with the colonial rulers. As the custodians of authority based on Europeans determining their right to divide Africa and the world around them and set up empires for themselves, they legislated, Mr. Speaker, against the activities of the enslaved. And so, Mr. Speaker, the determination to free oneself from the bondage of slavery became an offense. It became an offense, Mr. Speaker, punishable by some of the most horrific forms of punishment ever contrived, including execution. Our ancestors who fought as freedom fighters were not criminals. Mr. Speaker, to us, these are heroes on whose shoulders we now stand tall in this parliament. To the colonial oppressors, they were dissidents. They were fighting against the status quo, terrorizing the planters and their families. They were called criminals. So today, we claim our ancestral pedigree as fostered by many who, rather than giving to the brutality of their colonial masters, preferred rather than live in slavery to die on yonder gallows. And did. Mr. Speaker, I feel so good today. I'm so happy. And I'm sure all the members here today share in this wonderful feeling.
That is true. That is true. That is true.
And so,
one dissenter.
I know that many members would want to participate in this debate. And so I ask that the debate be carried over into next week, when I will close. But in the meantime, I look forward to all the presentations that will be made here in support of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Tweed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is most appropriate that this bill should be brought before this House on the day when the Center for Reparation Studies at the University of the West Indies will be launched later this afternoon. It is a concatenation of correct thinking. The origin of the motion, as the House will recall, was an initiative on my part several months ago, which sought the cleansing of the record of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, addressed at the time to the Minister of Justice, and I'm very grateful that it has blossomed into this comprehensive bill, which is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, I am a great-grandnephew of the Right Excellent George William Gordon, and in the family house on Duke Street, for generations, the picture of George William Gordon was turned around to show the back and to hide his face, because he was, in the eyes of the society then, indeed a criminal. It was not until the elevation of himself and the Right Excellent Paul Bogle to the status of national hero, and even then, the skepticism about the validity of the resistance that they and others throughout our history gave to the cause of freedom. And it is most appropriate that, albeit delayed, that history should be righted. And the basis for doing so is not only the morality and the appropriate exercise of political authority that is evident here and is redolent in the Minister's contribution. I wish to speak, Mr. Speaker, on the issue of the lawfulness of those convictions which are now being expunged, reversed, and abolished. In the earlier intervention that I made, I quoted from the trial of the late Right Excellent Marcus Garvey, and particularly the dicta of Mr. Justice Clark at the time, which showed that that trial, as indeed is equally evident in the fragmentary records of all of the previous trials of those who are elevated today, that the basic canons of jurisprudence, of law, were never observed. The canon nemo judex in causa sua, no one is a judge in their own cause, were blatantly ignored, sabotaged in all of the kangaroo courts that convicted the persons who are exonerated today. In Garvey's case particularly, as in the case of the 1865 martyrs, the principle of audi alteram parte, the right of an accused to be properly represented and to state his own case, again, was ignored. And it is important that we understand that there is not only a moral and political basis for what we are going to do today with unanimity and with strong feeling, but that we are, in fact, doing something which is most appropriate and valid in law, because when law is wrongly applied, it must be corrected. There is a legal as well as a moral imperative to enact. We are the highest court of the land, Mr. Speaker, and it is of great importance that we should do what we are doing. It comes at a time of general skepticism around the rule of law and the reliability of the justice process in our land. A policeman has been in prison for 3 years, it was reported to me today. His trial delayed time after time. The entertainer Ninja Man by name Ballantyne, has had 27 appearances, and the case against him, the Star newspaper reports today, has still not been adjudicated. Frustrated because of the absence of a courtroom. And all of our high-flown and justified sentiments today are, we must caution not to be compromised by the betrayal of the exalted justice which they, our heroes, sacrificed for. Today is a good day for the vindication of our past. Let it also be a good day for our zeal and activism to ensure that that for which they sacrificed is incarnated and canonized in our present and our future. The opposition fully supports the legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
May it please you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give my support to this bill entitled An Act to Absolve Certain National Heroes, namely the Right Excellent Sam Sharp, the Right Excellent George William Gordon, the Right Excellent Paul Bogle, and the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Their supporters, sympathizers, and participants by association, and other freedom fighters from criminal liability arising from participation in the 1760 Tackies or St. Mary Rebellion, the 1831 to 1832 Christmas Rebellion, the 1865 Morant Bay Rebellion, and the 1929 campaign of the People's Political Party, respectively, and to provide for connected matters. Mr. Speaker, I remember being asked by some young children, what gains have Jamaica made since independence? And the question was posed in the context of the many challenges that we face as a nation, and the view by some that independence had come prematurely. And as I thought about the question, my mind was directed to the Parliament, the creation of a national parliament, not a legislative assembly, not an external organ of the United Kingdom, and the power that is set out in Section 49 of the Constitution, empowering the Parliament to make laws for peace, order, and good government. Mr. Speaker, when I comb the history books, you see a lot of laws coming out of colonial era, clearly reflective of a time and ordering of society geared at a certain outcome, where people were seen as less than because of the color of their skin, because of their ancestry. Mr. Speaker, I stand proudly with the Honourable Minister Grange, the passion she has had for this matter, and all who have supported her. I share the views of the member from Kingston Central that time has come for us to rewrite some of our history and rewrite it through lens that makes sense, not lens of the colonial masters who would see actions like those referred to in this bill in the way they have seen it, resulting in the criminalization of so many people and so many who have lost their lives. I think today is a proud day in our Parliament, and I look forward to the beginning of another process when we comb through our history books and take off a lot of the laws that unduly criminalize our people and give so many a fresh chance while allowing them to take responsibility for their action. Mr. Speaker, the bill is short. The names are set out in the schedule. But for those who may not pick up the bill to read, Clause 2 says that the persons identified in column 1 of the schedule are hereby absolved from all criminal liability in respect of the events specified in relation to those persons in column 2 of the schedule. Column 1 sets out the names, and column 2 sets out the events. Clause goes on to provide that where an official document contains any information suggesting that a person referred to in subsection 1 was cautioned, charged, arrested, prosecuted, convicted, or sentenced for an offense in respect of an event referred to in subsection 1, the holder of that record shall include with that information a notification that pursuant to this act, the person has been absolved of criminal liability in respect of the offense. Time come, Mr. Speaker. It is a proud day. I wholeheartedly support the bill.
Mr. Hilton.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to support of the bill and not to claim any lineage from any of the persons named in this bill and for which this bill seeks to clear their name of any criminal wrongdoing. But, Mr. Speaker, in a real sense, each and every one of us have been impacted by the criminalization of these individuals. It has tainted our heritage. It has misdirected and skewed history. And so today's tabling of the bill and the debate that will ensue and subsequently the act to be passed addresses that wrong which has been done for centuries now. But, Mr. Speaker, as someone who hails from the parish of St. Thomas, I can tell a story about how the criminalization of the acts engaged in by Paul Bogle and George William Gordon in 1865, popularly called the Moran Bay Rebellion, how that has stigmatized that parish from then until even today. Because, Mr. Speaker, as it has been told to me by persons who weren't there but imbued themselves in the history and what happened at Stonygut, from Stonygut to Spanish Town, and the years and the intervening years, it is the case that the British authorities saw the acts committed by Bogle and Gordon and others as a rebellion, that they rebelled against British authority and the order, the existing order, and that, of course, they should be criminalized and the punishment was death. But the civil administration of the day, and subsequently, some would argue continuing even today, that those involved in that act and the people of St. Thomas were viewed as renegade and to be subjected to the act of banishment, so to speak. Because as others who are here from St. Thomas, I see my colleague Juliet and this House leader, the opposition leader, House Business, Paulwell, and maybe others. We know the story only too well, that St. Thomas and the underdevelopment of St. Thomas has its genesis and its roots in the 1865 rebellion. The civil administration of the day refused for decades, for perhaps centuries, to do anything to develop St. Thomas. Indeed, where many parishes can claim the educational legacy of institutions 300 years ago, and even earlier. St. Thomas got its first high school only in 1962. It was at our independence that Moran Bay High School, yes, at independence, that Moran Bay High School was built. And I know that because my sister was one of the first students to enter that high school at that time. And it is a testimony to the resilience of the people of St. Thomas that Moran Bay High School now stands in its own right as a premier high school in the country. But before that, and even subsequent, the pace of development in St. Thomas has been halted, altered, very intermittent, and the people of St. Thomas, I believe if you ask them, as I have been told, and I believe that the punishment, the sense that St. Thomas was being punished for having participated in and being a renegade parish, if you will, arise directly from the 1865 Moran Bay Rebellion. And so today, in a very real way, the tabling of the bill, the debate that is ensuing and will be generated by the tabling of the bill, affirms what we know, which is that those who fought for our freedom can't then be criminalized and to be made criminals for freeing us as a people. So the question then is, why has it taken us so long? Why has it taken us so long? But that's a debate in itself. I am pleased that today there is such a bill that represents the will of this House, constituted as it is, that these past wrongs must once and for all be corrected. And it is only right because we have, a number of us have engaged in acts of petition to foreign governments to free and to clear the name and to pardon some of these men, and it is only meet and fitting that all Parliament do the right thing and to act first as a condition, as a precondition for continuing the petition and the drive that we must do to ensure that the name of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey be cleared not only in foreign, but here in Jamaica. And so I agree with the mover of the bill. Today is a historic day, and it should be a source of pride, much pride, for all of Jamaica that we have come to this pass, come to this time, this occasion, when we have said, time come, let us put the record straight, and let us do what this generation must do. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too would like to add my voice to this act that has been tabled here today. It's a bold and a very welcome move, and I want to commend the Minister for having brought it here today. As a representative of the people in the constituency where the first national hero, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, was born, a son of St. Anne, and more particularly Northeast St. Anne, I believe that it's only fitting that I should add my voice to this. I know that there are those amongst us who have sought to have these criminal charges lifted in foreign countries, but we didn't seek to do it here. I believe that we now have the moral authority to demand that that is done overseas where these criminal charges remain against the names. And in particular, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Today is a new day. The constituency that I have the privilege to represent, there's a school there named after the first national hero. And I believe that we have set an example today, and we are saying to the young people of Jamaica, look into the lives of these people. Look at the price they paid for you. Some of them, the ultimate sacrifice was paid for us to be standing here today. And I believe with the minister bringing this act here today, that we are seeing a new day, a new dawn. And I am happy and I'm proud that I can truly go back to Centre and Northeast this evening or tomorrow to say that we have cleared the name of the first national hero, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and given him his rightful place in Jamaica and the world. The contribution of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, not just to Jamaica or the region, but to the world, cannot be overemphasized. He made black people they understood that they could stand up for themselves. They could be what they wanted to be, and that the black skin was a badge of honor. And I just want to comment to the young people today, this phenomenon of bleaching that has come into our society. Think on the words of the first national hero, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and wear your black skin as a badge of pride. Mr. Speaker, today is a good day, and I celebrate with my colleague, the Honourable Minister, in bringing this act to the House of Parliament, and I believe that today is indeed a historic day and one that we can truly be proud of. Thank you.
Go ahead, member.
I too rise in support of the bill that is placed before us today by my colleague. Sam Sharp Square is dead center of the constituency that I represent, and therefore I feel it necessary that I too should support this cause. As soon as we're finished here today, Mr. Speaker, going back to Montego Bay, standing in that square where they hung that noble gentleman many, many years ago, I will feel a sense of relief that that black coat that was hung over his head is lifted, and we can stand as free people of St. James to know that Sam Sharp has been moved. Thank you, sir.
Is it suspended next week?
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the debate.
Mr. Warmington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the debate on the bill shortly entitled National Heroes and Others, Freedom Fighters Absolution from Criminal Liability in Respect to Specified Events Act 2017 be suspended until next week.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which the Prime Minister gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the motion be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, we now move to the open presentation by the member from East Kingston and Port Royal of the State of the Constituency Debate 2017.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to do my presentation in this constituency debate. And firstly, let me thank the people of East Kingston and Port Royal for their continued support over these years since 1997. It's been 20 years of unbroken trust and faith by the people in me, and I in turn respect and appreciate them, and I do try to provide them with effective representation. Mr. Speaker, I must express at the start my disappointment with the way the constituency debate has unfolded for this year. It does appear to be an afterthought in the scheme of things. Mr. Speaker, our main purpose here is to represent the views and interests of our constituents. This debate is therefore an ideal platform for that, and we should all take up this opportunity and to fully participate. So let me remind us very quickly, Mr. Speaker, why these debates were instituted and what are some of the terms of it. Firstly, the standing orders were amended in 2015 to effect these debates, which should commence in September and end by the end of October. So we are already late. The debates are to go for 6 weeks, and we are going to go into November, so I think we are going to be in breach of the standing orders. That's very important. And, Mr. Speaker, very importantly, this debate puts us all on the same level. We are entitled to 15 minutes, whether you're a Prime Minister or you're a backbencher. And again, it speaks to our role as firstly representatives of the people who send us here, who elect us. Mr. Speaker, did you know, and I really want to remind you, as soon as your finishes interlude, that you, Mr. Speaker, are entitled, for the only time in the Parliament, to participate in a debate. Mr. Speaker, I want to remind you that this is the only occasion in this constituency debate where you, as Speaker, can leave the chair and to join us down here to participate. That is why I really want to emphasize the importance of the debate, because you don't get a chance to speak at all apart from during this debate. And the timing of the debate, Mr. Speaker, was to enable us to influence the budget. So it is timed just before the first budget call, and it was also to insist, Minister of Finance, that your team would be present to hear our presentation so that they could be taken into account before you start that process of the budget exercise for 2018-2019. I believe that the Parliament will have to send to the Financial Secretary the fulsome notes in relation to the presentations that we are making today. It was part of the reforms that were instituted in 2015, Mr. Speaker, to make Parliament more interesting and more meaningful. And it coincides with the change to equip Parliament with the technology to allow multimedia presentation, and also some of the changes in the budget debate, where we cut some of the speakers, and in sectoral debates, we shorten the time for presentation. So let me go very quickly in the 11 minutes that I now have remaining to speak a little bit about the great constituency of East Kingston Port Royal and what my people have asked me to put to this Parliament on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, at the start, and the member from West Portland, well, I will ignore it. Mr. Speaker, at the start of each calendar year, a feature of my role in the constituency has been a series of community meetings. I visit all of my 19 communities every year to meet with the residents, to ascertain from them, to discuss with them their views about the state of affairs, issues that concern them, and their suggestions. And we have these meetings, we record them diligently, we provide a summary of the issues, and at the end of each meeting we agree on what the priorities are. And of course, we limit the list of priorities. We have been doing this for 6 years, Mr. Speaker, and I find it very effective because people no longer can say that they don't see the MP. Because what I do is to establish a calendar of dates for meetings and publicize them, and we try to stick slavishly by them. So what are some of the things that came out of these meetings this year? Firstly, Mr. Speaker, in one of our communities, the Burger Gully community, the residents mandated me to deal with the question of zinc fencing. Throughout the community, you have this feature for many years, yes? And they said, MP, this year we want you to focus. We have removed zinc fencing in a number of other communities. But for this year, we want that to be the case here. And as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, we developed a project, we established a budget, and we made a submission on it under the HOPE project. But to our dismay, Mr. Speaker, we were told, Prime Minister, that this could not fit within the terms of the HOPE project. And I thought this must qualify for funding. But they were insistent that it would not meet the qualification. And in fact, I had to use the resources to do some road rehabilitation. Again, prior to coming out of some of the committee meetings. Well, right. But they told me now that we couldn't do this. And it is still a project that I like to implement. And well, I'm so happy you hear, remember, that the people of East Kingston have gotten reprieve in this matter. Prime Minister, I think the debate we had recently on the HOPE project, I think it's important that members here do get all the information and that we are fully apprised as to all elements of it, because especially in this regard, we thought that this would meet the criteria hands down. But I'm happy of your response there. We were able to use some of the resources to deal with Milk Avenue and Lineral Street. Those roads are now fully rehabilitated. And the people of East Kingston who are watching, I'm sure, are grateful to the MP for that. Mr. Speaker, I want to spend a moment now on a major project, and the Prime Minister knows that I was going to raise it, and he's probably anticipated me, but this is the Elegant Corridor project, where in 2015, funds were allocated for the entire Rockfort area going up Mountain View to receive special treatment. And it was more than just, Mr. Speaker, road rehabilitation. It was to enable significant infrastructure, water and sewage to be focused on. It was to remove vending from the sidewalk. It was to deal with some of the fencing. It was to deal with the dilapidated state of the Rockfort area, being the place that ought to be welcoming of our visitors once they leave the airport into Rockfort. Mr. Speaker, we're also to effect repairs to stoplights and streetlights, and as I mentioned before, relocation of vending. So this was the feature. It was to be funded through the TEF, and the National Works Agency was responsible for it. So you can imagine our dismay, and it came up in our committee meetings, when in the PAAC we were advised that the project was no longer on, and that there were no funds available for it. Mr. Speaker, you know the area. It has been an eyesore for many years. And the people in our community meetings have urged me to press. They did say some other things, but I don't think it's appropriate to report them here as to motive. But I know that we are going to get the attention of the government on this one. In fact, it not only impacts East Kingston, but it also affects Eastern St. Andrew. And I think well, the member from East Rural St. Andrew was a major lobbyist for the project. So I am sure that the Prime Minister will listen. Yes. The member also from Southeast St. Andrew is also affected. Mr. Speaker, there are some other major roadways that are in need of urgent attention to prevent further deterioration. The Port Royal Main Road, Mr. Speaker, needs immediate patching before the many potholes start to expand. Norman, I just dealt with Winward Road. Also, Norman Avenue, this is the purpose of this debate. Norman Avenue and Lucas Road require constant attention as these thoroughfares are heavily used as bypass roads and suffer from this overuse. Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to use this debate effectively so that my people can see that I'm here advocating on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, I want to deal with a special project that we have instituted now for 12 years. Mr. Speaker, it was clear to me that in relation to education, we had to do some special interventions because when I became MP, the data revealed that too many of our students from primary schools were graduating into secondary schools and they were not reading. They were reading below their grade level and some not at all. And so we decided to change the way we support education in the constituency, and our back to school project, our back to school efforts now was designed to assist with reading. And we have a special reading project in East Kingston where for the first term, we identify students who are not reading well, who are reading below their grade level. We ask for permission for them to be retained after school. We provide a stipend to the teachers. We provide refreshments. And we find that after 3 months in this special program, their reading skills improved exponentially, almost overnight. And the project has been going now for 12 years. And I'm very pleased that we are seeing improvements in all our primary schools. I just got the results of Port Royal Primary School, and their literacy level is 100% now. 100% now. And we, Mr. Speaker, we have expanded the program to Winward Road is the best primary school in Jamaica. And of course, my old school, Norman Gardens, is rising up as well. Mr. Speaker, we have expanded the program to enable computer training. We have also provided computer training for some of the parents whose children are involved in this project. Mr. Speaker, I have 1 minute left, so let me run through the rest of the presentation. I want to speak a little bit about Port Royal. I was so happy to hear that in relation to the divestment of the airport, that a part of the marketing is about the possibility of Port Royal. And probably we might return now to the major project of a cruise shipping pier, home porting, and the airport being the hub for all of these visitors coming to catch their ship. I will speak more about that at another time, but I want to speak of my legacy project because I'm not getting any younger. And soon we will have to leave certain things behind. And for me, we are establishing 2 sports complexes in East Kingston, one in Rockfort, one adjacent to Bellevue on Winward Road. That one we're going to be doing jointly with Camperdown High School. One of the features of the Rockfort Sports Complex is going to be a boxing facility. And we are saying to some of those youngsters who are involved in war, put away the gun. If you want to show that you're bad, come into a ring where we have rules and referees. Put on the gloves and to see who is the badder man. And we intend for this to be a showpiece because we believe that we will be able to produce our next Mike McCallum and Shrimpy Clark out of this. Mr. Speaker, there is so much more to be said, but we have to be restricted and be disciplined by the time that's allowed. So may it please you, thank you very much.
Mr. Speaker, it's not intended to do any further business for the day, so I ask that House be adjourned until next week, Tuesday, the 17th at 2 p.m. I also ask for the constituency debate be adjourned until next week also.
The motion is that the House be now adjourned until the 17th. That's next week, Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honourable House now stands adjourned.
Really big world. A big world to discover and explore. And because discoveries aren't